Hello, beautiful people, and welcome. Hi. To a banner review. Woo! Banner review, let's go! I heckin' love banner reviews. Alright, listen.
Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh. I hear the voice of fate.
Don't even try to mess with me.
Those are my thoughts. Let's move on. Okay, so Xingqiu, very, very good. Fischl, very, very good. Both of these characters are incredibly good at C0 and have very valuable constellations. Xingqiu more so than Fischl, but still pretty cool. Diona exists. She's kind of nice to have for like batterying for some teams, but her constellations are basically all useless. I've seen a lot of people think that Diona's C6 is good, but the reality is that Diona is very, very rarely played in teams where the C6 matters. Diona is mostly played in teams with Ella and Ayaka, and neither of those teams really care about elemental mastery. I guess the C2 helps for co-op, but all in all, it can be nice to have Diona on your account, but getting her constellations very rarely ends up actually mattering. In any case, though, we can still actually go through them. For Constellation 1, makes you regenerate energy when you use her burst. Now, if you are using her on Noblesse, this does technically reduce your ER requirements to be able to get your Noblesse back up. But outside of that, her burst isn't really necessary to use. Like, it's healing, but you don't need healing unless you got hit, which means that you shouldn't need this every rotation. So getting, like, reducing the ER requirements is really more useful for Noblesse than for anything else. C2 is pretty useful when it comes to co-op, because now your shield also shields your allies, but outside of that, it's kind of whatever. C3, pretty bad. C4, very bad. The thing about Diona's charge shots is that they actually have standard ICD, which means that if you are to use this, you're not going to be able to melt every hit, because for some reason, that's a thing. C5 is a little bit better than C3 because the shield levels tend to matter a bit more than the healing, the heal levels, but it's still not that big of a deal. And like I said, this one doesn't really matter that much. It can be nice and like very hyper-specific hyper fridge or like some melt teams, but most of the time it's really just not gonna matter. Next up, we have Fischl. Fischl's constellations aren't really necessary. The only constellation that is actually like a sizable difference is the C6. All the constellations before that, they can be nice, but especially with Quicken teams, which are Fischl's more popular teams now, they're a little bit less good because increasing talent levels doesn't actually increase Quicken damage. So it's a smaller portion of your damage that gets increased with your C1 to C5 constellations than if you were to play her in Taser teams or in Raiden teams with Bennett, right? Stuff like that. In Quicken, the constellations from 1 to 5 matter a lot less. So C1, C1's a bit of a joke, enables physical Fischl, but it's not good, so yeah. Hey, I mean, if you think physical Fischl is funny and you want to play it because you think it's fun, right? Like, and that's fine. This will be nice. But even then, it won't even be that nice, because like, it's just not that big of a deal. Even for physical Fischl, a pretty sizable portion of her damage is just electro, because her normal attacks are not very good. C2, it's alright. It's really mostly the AoE increase, which is noticeable. It makes it so that your E cast will more reliably actually hit, and because your E cast can trigger your Ascension 4, that's a pretty sizable amount of damage that can be gained from missing your E to hitting it, and the AoE like increase is actually noticeable. So it's kind of nice in that way, but it's not necessary. C3 increases skill damage, which is also pretty good, but again, it's not as impactful in Quicken teams as it is in her other teams. C4 makes it so that your burst deals a bit more damage and it heals. It's kind of whatever. Most teams either play a healer already, so this won't matter, or don't play a healer, and if you're dying on Fischl, you're probably going to die on your other characters too. C5 increases burst level. It's her worst constellation after C1 maybe. It's not very good. And finally, C6 increases Oz duration by 2 seconds and gives you coordinated attacks when you use normal attacks while Oz is active on any character. Now, it's mostly the 2-second increase that's pretty nice here. Effectively, right, because Oz is a 25-second cooldown and the burst is a 15-second cooldown, what generally ends up happening is you alternate between skill and burst to keep Oz on the field as much as possible, and over one rotation, you generally tend to do 25-second rotations in Quicken teams because of Fischl to get her E every rotation, right? And you have 10 seconds of E, and then 10 seconds from burst, and then 5 seconds of nothing. With this goes to 12 seconds, and then 12 seconds, and then 1 second, which is a lot more uptime. You also get more Quickens from the coordinated attacks. They share internal cooldown with the Oz hits themselves, which means that you will hit your hit rule more often and overall just apply a little bit more electro. It can also be pretty helpful in teams that rely on the electro application for setups, or in teams like Sucrose Salad, where you need electro to be on the enemy in order to be able to swirl it onto nearby seeds. All in all, the C6 is pretty good, but if you're far away from the C6, I wouldn't worry about it too much. It's nice, but she's still good at C0, and the constellations before that are really not that good, so going like deep on the banner just for this is not a great idea. Xingqiu, C1 is his worst constellation. It makes it so that his rain swords go from 3 to 4. This is actually not as bad as a lot of people think though, because it is still actually relevant healing. It's not that much, but I mean, hey, it increases his healing by 33%, so if you're playing teams that don't really have healers, this ends up being kind of nice. You don't actually get more hits of mitigated damage because you're barely ever using your skill and then not using your burst. You shouldn't really have any time where your skill is active but your burst isn't, and when you're in burst you don't actually lose the swords when you tank hits. C2 increases burst duration by 3 seconds and makes it so that burst shreds Hydro Res. It's very nice. C3 increases burst damage. Now this is good, but it's not nearly as good as C2 because the damage increase is fairly similar, but extended duration means that you're getting your application for longer, and that's most of the time really useful. It lets you use Xingqiu's burst earlier into your rotations without losing uptime on it on your carry, which gives you a lot of flexibility in your rotations. It's just really nice. C3 doesn't do that, but it is still a nice little amount of damage. C4 is a very situational constellation. It's really good specifically in like one team, which is channeling teams, national, because you can vape your E, and when you're vaping your E, increasing the damage by 50% matters a lot more. But even in those teams, like if you don't have it, it's fine. It helps front load your damage. It's a nice constellation for those teams, but it's not really like a breakpoint that you should really be looking for. C5 is just C4 but worse. And then C6, it increases your hydro application by making it so that instead of doing 2-3, 2-3, 2-3 with your burst, it's 2-3-5, 2-3-5, and the hit that attacks 5 times applies hydro twice, which helps with your hydro application. Also, and arguably more importantly, it regenerates HP, not HP, it regenerates energy on Xingqiu. When that special 5-sword hit is triggered, it regenerates 3 energy, which is actually a pretty big deal because you can generally get up to around 15 procs of his burst. That's up to 15 energy being generated, which is quite nice. Now, when it comes to the 5-star characters, we obviously have Hu Tao. I'm not going to go into constellations too much, but I will go into early constellations. So obviously Hu Tao's C1 is a pretty big increase on her. It helps her be a lot less reliant on her stamina. Right, it makes her charge attacks not cost stamina, so you can do dash cancels that cost stamina instead of jump cancels, which does increase your actual DPS. But also it makes it so that it becomes easier to manage your stamina, so you're less likely to just end up dying because you didn't dodge. Also, jumps don't give you iframes, dashes do. You effectively gain like tankiness while you're attacking because you're dashing, which is giving you iframes, so you're gonna get hit less. All in all, it's a nice thing, right? Between her C1 and her weapon, which we'll talk about the weapon banner in a second, but between the C1 and the weapon banner, they're fairly similar in terms of like how much they increase the damage. Homa has the upside of being usable on other characters, and C1 has the upside of, on top of being similar in damage, also making it easier to play. So do you care more about the Hu Tao team like feeling easier to play, or about being able to use it on other characters? That's going to tell you which one you want the most. Hu Tao just at C0 is a pretty good carry. She synergizes pretty well with vertical investment. If you want to actually like farm for her and get really good stuff for her, she will be pretty strong. And yeah, like that's a nice little thing. Neuvillette, which is a new 5-star character, is also a fairly strong character in my opinion. The Neuvillette pre-release got copyright striked because Hoyo sucks, but it is what it is. If you haven't seen it, I have contested the copyright claim, so I hope it'll be back up. But by the time it's back up, it's not going to be a pre-release anymore. But he's looking fairly strong. I think the best way to put it is that he's fairly similar to Ayato in terms of being able to work in a lot of different teams, but he trades the ability to work with characters like Bennett to go for like a hyper buff for more base damage. He also has less hydro application, which means that he's going to trigger less reactions over rotations, but in most teams the higher base damage tends to make up for it. His AoE is also smaller, but he's looking like a fairly strong character. If you're looking at his like constellations, the C1 is bait. Like it's not bad obviously, but I've seen a lot of people talk about the C1 being necessary for him because he gets resistance to interruption from it. You can get resistance to interruption from other characters, some of which work well with him like Beto, so it's far from necessary. The main thing about the C1 is the damage increase that it gives by making you able to go from 2 stacks of his Ascension, I think 1 passive, to 3, which increases your damage multiplier on charge attack from 125 to 160, which is, you know, it's a pretty sizable damage buff, but it's pretty in line with other Constellation ones. Maybe a bit above average. If you're choosing between that and his signature, I think I'd rather go for that Constellation, but I'm not entirely sure. The main thing is, like, generally, if you're considering vertical investment, it tends to not be free-to-play player, and if you're not a free-to-play player, you have access to the Battle Pass, and the Battle Pass weapon is actually not far behind his signature. All this to say, he's a fairly strong character with slightly above average Constellation. Now, when it comes to the weapon banners, I think this is a bit of a bait banner. Both of the signature weapons here are on characters who have Constellation 1s that are fairly similar in terms of how much they improve the character to the weapons. And then weapon banner, it's less reliable to get what you want. It'll take you more wishes on average. And the weapons on the weapon banner, like the 4 stars, are also kind of questionable, I guess. Middernosh Waltz is pretty dog shit, right? It's the quote-unquote Fischl weapon, but it's not a Fischl weapon. It gives you physical damage, and Fischl is terrible as a physical damage dealer, so don't. The Dog Hands Assistant, which is a new HP sword that gives you a little bit of EM and energy generation on the passive, is quite good on Nilo, but only on Nilo, basically. So it's kind of nice. I mean, it'll be alright on Farina as well. Considering the variance involved in pulling for a specific 4-star weapon, if you're going for the weapon specifically for this, you're better off just waiting for a weapon banner that has key on it. Favonius Lance, obviously very good. No downsides here. But there's a lot less different polearms in weapon banner rotation than there are other weapon types, which means that Favonius Lance is like the most common of the Favonius weapon. It just comes back all the time. Fav Codex is good, but I guess somewhat similarly, there's an okay-ish amount of decent catalysts, but this is still above average for sure. But then finally, the whatever it's called, the portable power saw is pretty bad. It's an HP claymore, and we don't really have real HP scalers, right? The closest things that we have are like Dory, who'd rather have Fav, and like Daya, who's more of an attack scaler than an HP scaler anyways. It's just another Bell. No, there's a reason why the Bell sucks, and this unfortunately doesn't beat the Bell allegations. All in all, the 4 stars are pretty not great here. So because the signature weapons are both for characters who have C1s that are similar in strength to their signature weapon, I would say that I wouldn't recommend going for this unless you really, like, you already have the C1 and you really want to keep improving them. That's basically what it boils down to. And that's going to be it for the banner review. Although I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, YouTube.